Welcome to our first module, which is going to explore the background to the Olympic Games. We're going to look at the nature of the Olympics, the history, how they've changed over time, the characteristics of the Olympics. We'll look at the Olympic movement and the International Olympic Committee. And we'll also introduce Sochi as the location of the current Winter Olympics. To give a little background on the nature of mega events, Effa will talk about the definition of these events.
So what are mega events? Usually they're ephemeral, which means it's only a fixed period of time where you can experience a mega event. They usually draw large amounts of spectators coming to the city, coming to the nation in which they're staged. And furthermore, they have a large media audience that gets broadcasted across the world. I refer most of the time to one of the most famous quotes by Maurice Rush, an academic in the field, who basically says they are large-scale cultural events which have a dramatic character, mass popular appeal, and international significance. Now, what else is about mega events? They usually cost billions of dollars. The preparations for the bids alone frequently exceed millions. The infrastructure that has to get invested, the operations that have to run smoothly during the event, in addition to security spendings, in addition to preparations for the athletes in particular. Now finally, one of the most interesting pieces about mega events are these examples and how different they are. So for example, if you take the Olympic Games as probably the most well-known mega event, it spans over 25 events within the same city. It is usually large-scale infrastructure investments are required. The most interesting piece is then looking at particular examples and how different they are. So for example, the most well-known event is probably the Olympic Games that are hosted every 4 years in the summer. They draw millions of spectators into the city, and they require large-scale preparations from the city itself. Another mega event are the World Cups, soccer World Cups, that are organized by FIFA and usually held within and across an entire nation. Another mega event are religious pilgrimages. Let's, for example, take the Hajj, in which millions of Muslims every year participate in the Hajj, connecting with Allah and showing their religious diligence.
So when we look at mega events, there are some fundamental questions that are important to consider. And as we go through this course, think a little about some of the big issues, the big questions that should be on our minds. And the first is, why undertake such a massive investment? Why engage with so many people over a very short period of time? Why do something so significant when it only lasts a short while? It's important to think about who controls the event, who makes decisions about the event, where it's held, how it's held, the events that are held for the Olympics, for example. Who decides who participates? It's also important to consider the costs and who pays those costs, and also to consider who benefits, who are the ultimate beneficiaries of an event like the Sochi Winter Olympics. So as we go through, we'll be looking at different elements of the Winter Olympics with these big questions in mind of who pays, why do it, who benefits, who participates, and why. Let's pause for a moment and think about where the Olympics came from. The Olympic Games are really an ancient tradition. They started in 776 BC and ran until 339 AD. So 1,000 years of Olympic history in Greece, based on the practice of sport. The event was held every 4 years. And in fact, one of the interesting characteristics is the terminology used, because the term Olympiad refers to a 4-year period. So when we see a reference to the games of an Olympiad, it means that after a 4-year pause from the last games, a new set of games begins. So we always talk about Olympiads, which in fact refer to a 4-year span of time rather than the event itself. During these games, there was a truce call. So it was a time for people to enjoy a brief period of peace. It was a time for athletes to come together in Greece and to compete against each other. There were not many events that were held and the events were held only for men. And the winner received no endorsements, but simply a laurel wreath to indicate that they were the best or the fastest. Come forward to the modern games. The Olympics had not been held for centuries, and as we get into the late 19th century, we find growing interest in sporting events. Now, it's important to consider what life in the West was like at that time, because industrial society was taking hold strongly, and people did not have much leisure time. So the endorsement and support of sports really was designed to support elites who had leisure time in which to practice a sport. The revival of sporting events was seen as an homage to Western civilization, as a connection from the past to the present, connecting the glories, the values of Western civilization to the somewhat chaotic emergence of industrial society. The events were also used to promote nationalist ideals, that countries promoted their national interests through these emerging sporting events. The role of elites was important because those were the people that had the time to participate, and those were the people who were also being disenfranchised in some ways by political change, which had led to a loss of power. So sports in the 19th century carries many different forces and values. It's a reflection of industrialization, a reflection of the social standing of elites, of connecting to past values at a time of change. And in this environment, we get the emergence of the International Olympic Committee and the first Olympic Games.
The owner of the Olympic Games is the International Olympic Committee, or short, the IOC. It holds ownership over the Summer Olympic Games, it holds ownership over the Winter Olympic Games, and recently added the Youth Olympics in 2010, where athletes can compete when they're between 14 and 18 years old. The International Olympic Committee was founded by Pierre de Coubertin in 1894. As a Frenchman, he was very empathetic about keeping the mind and the body healthy. The events of the Olympic Games are ruled by the Olympic Charter, which lists in all its bylaws how the Olympic Games are to be conducted. The Olympic Charter, the Olympic Games, the IOC, they all come together in the Olympic movement and basically broadcast Olympism as a combination between sports and human development. It's a philosophy that links both very tightly together. When you remember, I said Pierre de Coubertin was a Frenchman. However, the IOC is located in Lausanne, Switzerland, as a non-profit, non-governmental organization. So why is that? The IOC is limited to 115 members, who comprise of athletes, former athletes, international sports federations, and National Olympic Committee members. The current president of the IOC is Thomas Bach, who was a former Olympic fencer from Germany. In order to stage an Olympic Games, the IOC works very closely together with international federations. Those manage the rules of the sports. In the IOC's perspective, they are basically responsible for the integrity of the sport on a world level. The IOC also cooperates with the National Olympic Committee, who is responsible for the athletes and the teams from their nation, and who also select the bidding city, but more to that later. Then finally, we have the local organizing committee of the host, who basically are responsible for preparing the city, preparing the nation for an event like the Olympic Games. While we will discuss bidding in Module 3 in more detail, up front is to say that only one single city can stage a Winter Olympic Games, and they require a very long preparation period, usually beyond 10 years,